The gunshot echoed through the canyon just as Sarah Mitchell's horse reared up, sending her tumbling into the dusty Texas earth. And in that moment of terror, she knew her brother's enemies had finally found her. It was the summer of 1876, and the heat in the small town of Red Creek, Texas, had been unforgiving for weeks. Sarah had been riding hard from Austin, carrying documents that could clear her deceased brother's name of false murder charges. Thomas Mitchell had been shot down 3 months prior by a corrupt deputy named Vincent Harrow, who had framed him for killing a wealthy rancher's son. Sarah had spent every waking hour since then gathering evidence, testimonies from witnesses too afraid to speak up before, and financial records proving Vincent had actually committed the murder over a gambling debt. Now those same documents were scattered across the canyon floor as she scrambled behind a boulder, her heart hammering against her ribs. Another shot rang out, splintering rock inches from her head. She pressed herself flat against the stone, tasting copper and dust on her tongue. Her horse had bolted, taking her rifle with it. All she had was the small pistol tucked in her boot, and she had never been much of a shot. "Come on out, Miss Mitchell," a voice called from above. She recognized it as belonging to Caleb Morse, one of Vincent's hired guns. "Deputy Harrow just wants to have a conversation with you about them papers you've been collecting." Sarah's fingers trembled as she reached for her boot. A conversation with Vincent Harrow meant a shallow grave somewhere in this endless Texas wilderness. She had known the risk when she started investigating, but she could not let her brother's memory be tarnished by lies. Thomas had been a good man, a schoolteacher who had never hurt anyone in his life. He deserved justice, even if Sarah had to die trying to give it to him. The sun beat down mercilessly and sweat stung her eyes. She could hear boots scraping against rock as Caleb made his way down into the canyon. There had to be at least 2 of them, maybe 3. She was outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. Then she heard it, a different sound cutting through the afternoon air. Hoofbeats coming fast, multiple horses. Sarah's breath caught, more of Harrow's men. But the gunfire that erupted next was not aimed at her. She heard Caleb curse, heard him scramble back up the rocks. The shootout lasted maybe 2 minutes, though it felt like an eternity. When silence finally fell, Sarah remained frozen behind her boulder, pistol drawn, waiting. "Ma'am," a deep voice called out, "if you are the lady those men were shooting at, you can come out now. They have moved on." Sarah hesitated. It could be a trick. But what choice did she have? Slowly, she emerged from behind the boulder, gun still raised. 3 men sat on horseback above her. The one who had spoken swung down from his saddle with easy grace. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore the weathered clothes of a working cowboy, leather chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a black hat that had seen better days. A silver star was pinned to his vest. "Name is Jake Thornton," he said, moving slowly, hands visible. "I am a U.S. Marshal out of San Antonio. These are my deputies, Frank Morrison and Henry Chen." He gestured to the 2 men still mounted. One was an older fellow with a gray beard, the other a young Chinese man who could not have been more than 25. Sarah lowered her gun but did not holster it. "Sarah Mitchell. Thank you for your timing, Marshal." Jake's green eyes swept over her, taking in her dusty traveling dress, the papers scattered across the canyon floor, the fear she was trying hard to mask. Those were Vincent Harrow's men. What business does a deputy from Austin have sending guns after a woman in the middle of nowhere? "The kind of business that involves covering up murder," Sarah said. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "My brother was killed by Harrow 3 months ago. Harrow framed him for a crime he did not commit. I have been gathering evidence to prove it." Jake's expression darkened. "I have heard rumors about Harrow, nothing I could prove but enough to make me interested." He looked at the scattered papers. "Is that your evidence?" Sarah nodded, finally holstering her pistol and moving to gather the documents. Her hands were still shaking. Jake crouched down to help her, and their fingers brushed as they both reached for the same piece of paper. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, and she pulled back quickly. He handed her the document without comment, but she caught something in his eyes, a flicker of awareness that matched what she had just felt. They worked in silence, collecting every piece of paper. Frank and Henry had dismounted and were keeping watch on the canyon rim. When everything was gathered, Jake stood and offered Sarah his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. He was even taller up close, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Your horse ran south," he said. "Henry will track it down. In the meantime, you cannot stay out here alone. Harrow will send more men once these report back that they failed." "They will not be reporting back," Henry called down. "Recognize 2 of them from wanted posters. They will be running scared now, at least for a while." Jake nodded. "Even so, Miss Mitchell needs protection. We were heading to Red Creek anyway. There have been reports of cattle rustling in the area. You were headed there too, I am guessing?" Sarah nodded. "I have a meeting arranged with Judge Callahan. He is circuit riding through Red Creek next week. He is the only judge I trust to actually look at this evidence and not sweep it under the table to protect Harrow's friends." "Judge Callahan is a good man," Jake agreed. "But that is a week away. Where were you planning to stay?" "There is a boarding house, Mrs. Patterson's place. She was a friend of my mother's." Jake gathered the reins of his horse, a sturdy bay gelding. "Then that is where we will take you. Frank, you and Henry search the area, make sure none of Harrow's men are still lurking. I will escort Miss Mitchell into town." Sarah wanted to protest that she could take care of herself, but the words died in her throat. She was exhausted, terrified, and still shaking from how close she had come to dying. Pride was not worth her life. "Thank you, Marshal." He swung up into his saddle, then offered his hand again. "You can ride with me until we find your horse." She had not ridden double with a man since she was a child riding with her father, but there was no other option. She took Jake's hand, and he pulled her up effortlessly. She settled behind him, acutely aware of the solid warmth of his back against her chest, the leather and sage smell of him. She had to put her arms around his waist to keep her balance, and she felt him tense slightly at the contact before relaxing. "Hold on," he said, and urged the horse forward. They rode in silence for a while, following the canyon south before climbing up to the main trail. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Despite the circumstances, Sarah found herself noticing how capable Jake was, the way he sat his horse with practiced ease, how his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings for threats. There was something deeply competent about him that made her feel safer than she had in months. "How long have you been investigating your brother's death?" Jake asked after a while. "Since the day of his funeral. I knew immediately that the charges were false." Thomas was gentle. He could barely bring himself to hunt for food. The idea that he would shoot an unarmed man in cold blood was absurd. "What did the evidence show at trial?" Sarah's arms tightened around Jake's waist without her meaning to. "There was no trial. Vincent Harrow claimed Thomas drew on him when he went to arrest him, said it was self-defense. But I found witnesses who saw the whole thing. Thomas was unarmed. Harrow shot him in the back." Jake was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "I am sorry for your loss, and I am sorry the law failed your brother." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. She had been holding herself together through sheer willpower for so long that simple kindness threatened to undo her. "Thank you," she managed. "These witnesses, they are willing to testify. 2 of them are. A third is too frightened, but I have other evidence." Financial records showing Harrow was deep in debt to the rancher's son, Marcus Webb. Testimony from a bartender who heard them arguing the night Marcus was killed. A pawn ticket showing Harrow sold Marcus's pocket watch the day after the murder. Jake whistled low. "That is solid evidence. No wonder Harrow wants you dead. He has friends in high places, the county sheriff, the mayor, even some of the rangers. That is why I had to go all the way to Judge Callahan. He has no ties to Red Creek or Austin. He will judge the case on its merits. If you survive until next week." Sarah shivered despite the heat. "Yes, if I survive." Jake's hand came down briefly to cover hers where they clasped around his waist. The gesture was quick, almost unconscious, but it sent warmth flooding through her. "You will. I give you my word on that." They rode on as the sun continued to set. Sarah found herself studying the back of Jake's neck, the way his dark hair curled against his collar, the strong line of his shoulders. She barely knew this man, yet something about him made her want to trust him completely. Perhaps it was the desperate circumstances. Or perhaps it was something more, something in the way he had looked at her in that canyon, like she mattered, like her fight for justice was important. As they crested a hill, Red Creek came into view. It was not much of a town, just a main street with maybe 20 buildings, a church, a saloon, a general store, and various other establishments. But after the isolation of the trail, it looked beautiful to Sarah. They found Henry waiting at the edge of town with Sarah's horse. The animal looked none the worse for wear, and Sarah's rifle was still secured to the saddle. Jake helped her down, and she tried not to notice how his hands lingered at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "Mrs. Patterson's boarding house is on the east end of town," Sarah said, taking her horse's reins from Henry. "I can make it from here." "I will see you there safely," Jake said. It was not a question. They walked their horses down the main street as the last light faded from the sky. Lanterns were being lit in windows, and Sarah could hear piano music drifting from the saloon. A few people were still out, and she noticed how they looked at Jake's Marshall Star with respect. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was a tidy two-story building with a welcoming porch. The older woman herself came bustling out as they approached, her round face creased with concern. "Sarah Mitchell, I got your telegram saying you would arrive today, but when it got dark and you had not come, I was worried sick." She noticed Jake and her expression changed to curiosity. "Marshall Thornton, I heard you were in the area." "Ma'am," Jake said, tipping his hat. "Miss Mitchell ran into some trouble on the trail. I wanted to make sure she arrived safely." Mrs. Patterson's eyes sharpened. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that involves Vincent Harrow," Sarah said quietly. The older woman's face paled. "Oh, child, you are still pursuing that. It is too dangerous." "It is necessary," Sarah said firmly. "Thomas deserves justice." Mrs. Patterson sighed but nodded. "Come inside, I have kept dinner warm for you." She looked at Jake. "Marshall, you are welcome to join us." "I have plenty." Jake hesitated, and Sarah found herself hoping he would accept. "I would be grateful, ma'am. It has been a long day." They stabled the horses behind the boarding house, and Sarah retrieved her saddlebags. Inside, the house smelled of bread and stew. There were 3 other guests at the boarding house, a traveling salesman and an older couple heading west. They were finishing their dinner, and Mrs. Patterson quickly set places for Sarah and Jake at the large kitchen table. The stew was thick with beef and vegetables, and Sarah realized she had not eaten since dawn. She tried to maintain her manners, but hunger won out and she ate quickly. Jake matched her pace, and she caught him smiling slightly at her enthusiasm. "When did you last eat?" he asked quietly. "This morning, before sunrise. I wanted to make good time." "You should not have been traveling alone," Sarah bristled slightly. "I can take care of myself, Marshall." "I am not doubting your capability, but Harrow is dangerous. He has already killed your brother. He will not hesitate to kill you too." She knew he was right, but it still rankled. "I did not have much choice. There is no one else to fight for Thomas. Our parents are dead. We have no other family." Jake was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "You are brave, foolish perhaps, but brave. Is there much difference in the Wild West?" Sarah asked with a slight smile. He smiled back, and it transformed his face. "Not usually, no." After dinner, Mrs. Patterson showed Sarah to her room on the 2nd floor. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. Sarah set her saddlebags down and carefully placed her brother's documents in the drawer of the small table by the bed. She was washing her face when she heard voices downstairs. Jake was talking to Mrs. Patterson, his deep voice carrying up through the floorboards. She could not make out the words, but something about the sound was comforting. She found herself wondering where he would sleep tonight. The boarding house had limited rooms. Perhaps the saloon had rooms to rent. There was a knock on her door. Sarah dried her face and opened it to find Mrs. Patterson standing there with fresh towels and a concerned expression. "That marshal asked me to keep an eye on you," the older woman said. "He seems quite concerned for your safety." "He is just doing his duty," Sarah said, taking the towels. Mrs. Patterson did not look convinced. "He will be sleeping downstairs in the parlor tonight, said he wants to be nearby in case there is trouble." Sarah's heart did an unexpected flutter. "That is not necessary, he should get a proper room." "Try telling him that. He was quite insistent. I think he likes you, dear." "We only just met today." Mrs. Patterson smiled knowingly. "Some things do not require time. Your mother knew she would marry your father the first day they met. She told me so herself." After the older woman left, Sarah sat on her bed, her thoughts swirling. She should be focused on her brother's case, on preparing for her meeting with Judge Callahan, on staying alive. Instead, she found herself thinking about green eyes and strong hands and the feeling of safety she had experienced riding with Jake. She barely knew him. This was foolish. And yet, when she finally blew out her lamp and lay down to sleep, it was thoughts of Jake Thornton that followed her into dreams. Sarah woke before dawn, as was her habit. She dressed quickly in a fresh traveling dress, this one a practical brown cotton, and tied her blonde hair back in a simple bun. When she came downstairs, she was surprised to find Jake already awake, standing on the front porch with a cup of coffee. "Morning," he said, turning as she stepped outside. "Mrs. Patterson has coffee on the stove. You are up early. Old habit. Besides, I wanted to make sure the night passed quietly." "Did it?" "Mostly. There was some activity at the saloon around midnight. Frank went to check it out." "Just cowboys drinking too much, nothing concerning." Sarah poured herself coffee and joined him on the porch. The sun was just beginning to paint the horizon pink and gold. Red Creek was still quiet, just a few early risers starting their day. "What is your plan for the next week?" Jake asked. "Wait. Prepare my testimony. Hope Harrow does not find me before Judge Callahan arrives. That last part is what concerns me. Frank and Henry and I will be investigating the rustling reports, but we will stay close to town. I will make sure either Frank or Henry is near the boarding house at all times." "You do not have to do that, Marshal. I know you have your own work." Jake turned to look at her directly. "Miss Mitchell, a woman's life is in danger and she is trying to bring a corrupt lawman to justice. That is exactly my work." Sarah met his eyes and felt that same jolt of connection she had experienced yesterday. "Thank you, and please call me Sarah." "Sarah." He said her name carefully, like he was testing how it felt. "Then you should call me Jake." They stood in comfortable silence, drinking their coffee as the town woke up around them. Sarah found herself very aware of Jake's presence beside her, the way he stood with easy confidence, always alert but never tense. She wondered what his story was, how he had become a marshal, where he came from. But before she could ask, Frank came riding up. "Morning," the older deputy said, dismounting. "Jake, we should head out to the Reynolds Ranch this morning. That is where most of the cattle have gone missing." Jake nodded but looked reluctant to leave. "Henry, he is watching the North Road. Anyone coming from Austin will come that way." Sarah touched Jake's arm without thinking, then pulled back quickly. "Go, do your job. I will be fine here. Mrs. Patterson has a shotgun and she knows how to use it." "That she does," Jake agreed, "but I will be back before nightfall. Do not leave the boarding house without one of us nearby." "I will not go looking for trouble, I promise." Jake smiled slightly. "Trouble seems to find you whether you look for it or not." He was not wrong. Sarah watched as Jake and Frank rode off, feeling oddly bereft at his departure. This was ridiculous. She had more important things to worry about than an attraction to a man she barely knew. She went back inside, determined to focus on preparing for her meeting with Judge Callahan. The morning passed quietly. Sarah organized her documents, made notes on what she would say, rehearsed her testimony. Mrs. Patterson brought her lunch, and they talked about Sarah's mother, sharing memories that made Sarah's heart ache with loss. Her parents had both died of fever 4 years ago, leaving just Sarah and Thomas. And now Thomas was gone too. "You are all alone now, are you not?" Mrs. Patterson asked gently. "I am," Sarah admitted, "but I will manage. Thomas left me a little money. Enough to start over somewhere new once this is finished. You could stay in Red Creek. I could use help running the boarding house. I am not getting any younger." It was a kind offer, but Sarah could not imagine staying in this place after everything that had happened. Too many memories, too much pain. "I will think about it," she said diplomatically. The afternoon was hot, and Sarah found herself dozing in a chair by the window. She woke to the sound of horses and looked out to see Jake riding back into town earlier than expected. Her heart lifted at the sight of him, and she did not try to examine why. She was downstairs when he came through the door. His shirt was dusty and he looked tired, but his eyes sought her out immediately. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Quiet day, you?" "Found some tracks at the Reynolds Ranch." "Whoever is taking their cattle knows what they are doing. Professional operation." He pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair. "I need to clean up, then maybe we could talk. I have some questions about Harrow and his operation." "Of course." An hour later, they sat together in the boarding house parlor. The other guests were out, giving them privacy. Jake had cleaned up and changed into a fresh shirt, and Sarah tried not to notice how good he looked with his hair still damp from washing. "Tell me everything you know about Vincent Harrow," Jake said, pulling out a small notebook. Sarah took a breath and began. She told him about how Harrow had arrived in Austin 2 years ago, quickly making himself indispensable to the sheriff. How he had cultivated relationships with wealthy ranchers and businessmen. How there had been whispers about his methods, but no one willing to speak up officially. "My brother was his breaking point," Sarah said. Thomas witnessed Harrow and Marcus Webb arguing outside the saloon. Harrow owed Marcus money, a lot of it from poker games. Marcus was threatening to tell his father to have Harrow fired. 2 days later, Marcus was found shot dead behind the livery stable. And Harrow claimed your brother did it. He said Thomas had been courting Marcus's sister, that Marcus had rejected the match, that Thomas killed him in anger. But it was all lies. Thomas had never even met the Webb family. He was a schoolteacher. He spent his days with children, not chasing after society girls. Jake was writing quickly, his face intent. "The witnesses you found, what exactly did they see?" "One saw Harrow following Marcus the night of the murder. Another heard the gunshot and saw Harrow running from the scene. The third, the one who will not testify, actually saw Harrow shoot Marcus. But he is too afraid. Harrow has threatened his family." "What about physical evidence?" Sarah pulled out the pawn ticket she had mentioned before. "This. Marcus Webb's gold pocket watch with his initials engraved on it was pawned by Vincent Harrow the day after the murder. The pawnbroker remembered him clearly." Jake studied the ticket, his expression darkening. "This is damning. Combined with the witness testimony and the financial records, Judge Callahan will have to act, if I live long enough to give him the evidence." Jake looked up at her and something fierce entered his eyes. "You will, I swear it, Sarah." The way he said her name made her breath catch. There was promise in it, protection, but also something more personal. She found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by something she did not fully understand. "Why does this matter so much to you?" she asked quietly. "You could have just run off Harrow's men yesterday and moved on, but you are here protecting me, investing yourself in this case. Why?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low. 5 years ago, my sister was murdered by her husband. Everyone knew he had done it, but he was wealthy, connected. The local law would not touch him. By the time I got there, it was too late. He had fled, and I have been hunting him ever since." Sarah's heart contracted. "Oh, Jake, I am so sorry." Her name was Emma. She was kind and funny and believed the best in people. It got her killed. He met Sarah's eyes. "When I see someone like you, fighting for justice for someone they loved, refusing to let the powerful get away with their crimes, I cannot walk away. I will not walk away." Without thinking, Sarah reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. They sat like that for a moment, connected by shared grief and determination. "Did you ever find him?" Sarah asked. "Your sister's husband." "Last year. He had changed his name, started over in California, but I found him. He is in prison now for life." "Good," Jake smiled slightly. "Emma would have liked you. She always admired brave women." "I do not feel brave. Most of the time I feel terrified." "That is what makes it brave, doing it anyway despite the fear." They talked until dinner, sharing stories about their siblings, their childhoods, the paths that had brought them to this moment. Sarah learned that Jake had grown up in Kansas, that he had become a lawman specifically to hunt down Emma's killer, that he had stayed in the profession because he was good at it, and it gave him purpose. "Do you ever think about doing something else?" Sarah asked. "It must be exhausting, always chasing criminals, always in danger." "Sometimes," Jake admitted, "I think about settling down somewhere, maybe getting a small ranch, raising horses. But then I think about all the people who need help, all the injustices that go unpunished if men like me do not stand up. It is hard to walk away." "You are a good man, Jake Thornton." He looked at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I am trying to be." Over the next few days, they fell into a pattern. Jake and his deputies investigated the rustling case during the day, but Jake always returned to the boarding house by evening. He and Sarah would have dinner together, then sit on the porch or in the parlor, talking until late into the night. Mrs. Patterson watched them with knowing smiles but said nothing. Sarah found herself looking forward to these evenings more than she wanted to admit. Jake was easy to talk to, intelligent and thoughtful. He listened when she spoke, really listened, and he asked questions that showed he was genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. It was refreshing after a lifetime of men who dismissed her as just another woman with no important ideas. But beyond the intellectual connection, there was something else growing between them. The way Jake looked at her sometimes, like she was the most fascinating woman he had ever met. The accidental touches that seemed to happen more and more often, hands brushing as they reached for the same thing, shoulders touching as they sat together on the porch. The awareness that hummed between them, electric and undeniable. On the fourth evening, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Jake said, "I sent a telegram to a friend of mine today. Another marshal based in San Antonio told him about the Harrow situation." Sarah's stomach tightened. "Why?" "Because if something happens to you before Judge Callahan arrives, I want to make sure someone else knows the truth, someone who can pursue the case. You think something will happen to me. I think Harrow is desperate and desperate men do foolish things." Jake turned to face her. "But I also think you are protected. Between me, Frank, and Henry, someone is always watching. Harrow would be stupid to try anything now. He was stupid enough to murder 2 men and frame my brother. I would not put anything past him." Jake reached over and took her hand. It had become natural between them, this casual physical contact. "I will not let anything happen to you, Sarah, I promise." She wanted to believe him, but she had learned the hard way that good intentions were not always enough. "You cannot control everything, Jake." "No, but I can be prepared." He squeezed her hand gently. "There is something else I need to tell you. The rustling case, it might be connected to Harrow." Sarah's head snapped up. "What?" "Frank found evidence that the stolen cattle were rebranded and sold through a dealer in Austin. We traced the paperwork. Guess who was supposed to receive a cut of the profits? Vincent Harrow. Him and 3 other men, including the county sheriff. It is a whole network of corruption, Sarah. What you uncovered with your brother's case is just the tip of it." Sarah felt sick. "How deep does this go?" "Deeper than I initially thought. But it also means you have even more leverage. If Judge Callahan sees evidence of widespread corruption, he will have to act decisively. He will have no choice but to bring in outside law, maybe even the Texas Rangers. But it also means more people who want me dead." Jake's expression was grim. "Yes, which is why I am not leaving your side until Judge Callahan arrives and you have given your testimony." "What about the rustling investigation?" Frank and Henry can handle it. You are more important." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Sarah looked at Jake, at the determination in his green eyes, the set of his jaw, the way he held her hand like it was something precious. Her heart was racing, and she knew this was not just about protection anymore. Something real was developing between them, something that terrified her almost as much as Vincent Harrow did. "Jake," she said softly, whatever this is between us, it is complicated. I know. I am in danger. You are a lawman. When this is over, you will move on to your next case." "This is not the time or place for what?" Jake asked, his voice low. "For honesty, for connection. Sarah, I have spent 5 years moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long, never letting myself feel anything. And then I met you, and suddenly I am thinking about things I have not thought about in years. A future, a home, someone to come back to." Sarah's breath caught. "You barely know me. I know you are brave and determined. I know you love your brother enough to risk everything for his memory. I know you are smart and funny, and you have a strength that awes me. I know that when I am with you, I feel more alive than I have in years." He raised their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Maybe that is not enough for most people, but it is enough for me." Tears stung Sarah's eyes. She wanted to lean into him, but fear held her back. "I am scared," she whispered. "I am scared of what comes after the trial, after the danger is past. What if this feeling is just because of the circumstances? What if when everything is calm again, we realize we do not actually fit?" Jake stood and pulled her up with him. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. "Then we will figure it out, together. But I am not walking away from you without at least trying. Life is too short and too uncertain. I learned that when Emma died. You do not get unlimited chances at happiness." "Jake," Sarah breathed, and then his lips were on hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost questioning. But when Sarah kissed him back, wrapping her arms around his neck, it deepened into something more. Jake's arms came around her waist, pulling her close, and Sarah felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. She had been kissed before, but never like this, never with this combination of tenderness and passion, safety and excitement. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "I am not going anywhere," he said firmly. "Whatever comes after, we will face it together." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. She believed him. Maybe she was a fool, but she believed him. They stood there on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms as the last light faded from the sky. Inside the boarding house, Mrs. Patterson peeked through the curtains and smiled to herself before discreetly withdrawing. The next morning, everything changed. Sarah woke to the sound of shouting in the street. She rushed to her window and saw smoke rising from the far end of town. She dressed quickly and ran downstairs to find Jake already there, strapping on his gun belt. "What is happening?" she asked. "Fire at the general store. Everyone is helping to put it out." He looked at her intently. "You stay here, lock the doors. Do not open them for anyone but me or Frank or Henry. You think this is a diversion. I do not know, but I am not taking chances. Mrs. Patterson, you have your shotgun." The older woman nodded, already holding the weapon. "I will keep Sarah safe, Marshal." Jake kissed Sarah quickly, fiercely. "I will be back as soon as I can." He was gone before she could respond. Sarah watched from the window as he ran down the street toward the smoke. Mrs. Patterson locked the front door and checked the back entrance. "Come away from the window, dear," the older woman said. "If this is a trap, we do not want to make you an easy target." Sarah reluctantly moved away, but her nerves were screaming. Something felt wrong. The fire, the timing, it was too convenient. She paced the parlor, every muscle tense, waiting for something to happen. An hour passed. The smoke began to clear. Sarah could see people moving back and forth in the street, carrying buckets, calling out. The fire was being contained. She started to relax, thinking maybe she had been paranoid. Then she heard the creak of a floorboard upstairs. Sarah and Mrs. Patterson froze, eyes meeting. Someone was in the house. But how? They had locked all the doors and windows, unless someone had been hiding upstairs all along, waiting for this exact moment. "Give me the shotgun," Sarah whispered. Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "I know how to use this." "You get behind me." They moved toward the stairs, Mrs. Patterson leading with the shotgun raised. The stairs creaked under their weight, each sound impossibly loud in the tense silence. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. They reached the top of the stairs. The hallway was empty, but Sarah's door was ajar. She knew she had closed it when she left. "Come out," Mrs. Patterson called, her voice steady. "I am armed and I will shoot." For a moment, nothing. Then Vincent Harrow stepped out of Sarah's room, his hands raised but a confident smile on his face. He was a handsome man in his 30s, well-dressed and charming-looking, the kind of man people instinctively trusted. Sarah felt rage surge through her. "Now, ladies, there is no need for violence," Harrow said smoothly. "I just came to have a conversation with Miss Mitchell." "You broke into my house," Mrs. Patterson snapped. "That is not conversing." "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but Miss Mitchell has been avoiding me and we really do need to talk." His eyes fixed on Sarah. "You have something that belongs to me, documents, evidence. Hand them over and I will leave peacefully. So you can destroy them, not a chance." Sarah was pleased that her voice came out strong despite her fear. Harrow's smile faded. "Miss Mitchell, you do not understand the situation you have stumbled into. There are powerful men involved in this, men who will not let you destroy what they have built. If you persist with this foolish crusade, you will not live to see Judge Callahan." "Is that a threat?" "It is a fact, but it does not have to be this way. Give me the documents. Take the money I am prepared to offer you. Start a new life somewhere far from here. Everyone wins. Except my brother who is dead because of you. Except Marcus Webb who you murdered." Harrow's expression hardened. "Your brother was collateral damage. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Marcus was a foolish boy who did not understand how the world works. Neither of them had to die, but they made their choices." "You made the choice to kill them," Sarah said, her voice shaking with fury. "You are a murderer and a coward." Harrow moved fast, faster than Sarah expected. He lunged forward, grabbing the barrel of Mrs. Patterson's shotgun and yanking it from her hands. The older woman cried out, stumbling back. Sarah tried to push past her, but Harrow pointed the shotgun at them both. "Enough," he said, his charming veneer completely gone now. "I gave you a chance to do this the easy way. Now we do it my way. Where are the documents?" "In my room," Sarah said. She had to keep him talking, had to buy time for Jake to get back. "In the drawer by the bed." "Get them." Sarah moved slowly toward her room, her mind racing. She needed a weapon, a plan, something. But Harrow was right behind her, the shotgun never wavering. She opened the drawer and pulled out the stack of papers, her hands trembling. "All of them," Harrow demanded. Sarah gathered everything, her heart sinking. Months of work, the only evidence that could clear Thomas's name, and she was just handing it over. But what choice did she have? If she refused, Harrow would kill them both. She turned to give him the papers and saw her chance. Harrow had lowered the shotgun slightly, confident now that he had won. Sarah threw the papers at his face and dove to the side, toward the bed where she kept her pistol under the pillow. Harrow cursed, batting away the papers. Mrs. Patterson screamed. Sarah's hand closed around her pistol just as Harrow brought the shotgun back up. They faced each other across the small room, both armed now, both desperate. "You are making a mistake," Harrow said. "The only mistake I made was not shooting you the moment you came out of my room. You do not have the nerve." He was wrong. Sarah pulled the trigger. The shot was deafeningly loud in the small room. Harrow looked surprised, then down at his shoulder where blood was blooming across his shirt. The shotgun fell from his hands as he stumbled back. Sarah did not hesitate. She ran forward, kicked the shotgun away, and kept her pistol trained on Harrow as he collapsed against the wall, clutching his shoulder. "You shot me," he said, almost incredulous. "You killed my brother," Sarah replied coldly. "Be grateful I did not aim for your heart, Mrs. Patterson was already gathering the scattered documents. Footsteps thundered on the stairs, and then Jake burst into the room, gun drawn, Frank and Henry right behind him. He took in the scene in an instant. Harrow on the floor, bleeding. Sarah standing over him with a smoking pistol. The scattered documents. "Sarah," Jake breathed, rushing to her side. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, suddenly shaking as the adrenaline started to wear off. "He broke in, during the fire. He wanted the documents." Jake gently took the pistol from her trembling hands and passed it to Frank. Then he pulled Sarah into his arms, holding her tight. She buried her face in his chest and let herself shake, let herself feel the terror she had pushed aside to survive. "I have got you," Jake murmured against her hair. "You are safe now, you are safe." Frank and Henry were already securing Harrow, binding his wound enough to stop the bleeding, then cuffing his hands. The former deputy was cursing steadily, threatening them all with what his powerful friends would do. "Your powerful friends are about to have their own problems," Jake said, releasing Sarah long enough to confront Harrow. "We found the records from the rustling operation. We know about the network. By the time Judge Callahan is done, half the law in Austin will be under investigation." Harrow's face went pale. "You cannot prove anything?" "We can prove plenty, and now we can add breaking and entering, attempted murder, and threatening witnesses to your charges." Jake's smile was cold. "You are done, Harrow." They took Harrow away, Frank and Henry marching him down to the small jail at the edge of town. The doctor was called to treat his shoulder wound under guard. Jake stayed with Sarah, refusing to leave her side. Mrs. Patterson made tea, her hands shaking slightly but her voice steady. "That was very brave, dear, and very good shooting." "My father taught me," Sarah said. She was still trembling, sitting on the sofa with Jake's arm around her. "He said a woman needed to know how to protect herself. He was a wise man." They sat in the parlor as the afternoon sun streamed through the windows. Sarah could hear normal sounds from the street now, life going on as if nothing earth-shattering had just happened. But everything had changed. Harrow was in custody. The evidence was safe. She was alive. "I thought he would kill us," Sarah said quietly. "When he had that shotgun pointed at us, I thought that was it." "But you did not freeze," Jake said. "You fought back, you saved yourself and Mrs. Patterson." "I was terrified." "That is what makes it brave." He kissed her temple gently. "You are the strongest woman I have ever met, Sarah Mitchell." She looked up at him, at the pride and admiration in his eyes, and felt something settle inside her. She had spent so long afraid, so long fighting alone, but she was not alone anymore. Jake was here, and he was not going anywhere. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we wait for Judge Callahan. With Harrow in custody and all the evidence documented, the trial will be straightforward. You will testify, the witnesses will testify, and justice will finally be served. And after that..." Jake turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "After that, you tell me what you want, where you want to go, what you want to do, and if you want me there with you, I will hand in my marshal's badge today." Sarah's eyes widened. "Jake, no, I cannot ask you to give up your career." "You are not asking, I am offering. Sarah, these past few days with you have shown me something I have been missing, purpose beyond just chasing down criminals, connection, love." He said the last word carefully, watching her face. "Yes, love, I know it is fast, I know it seems crazy. But I am falling in love with you, and I think you might be falling for me too." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I am. I have been trying not to, trying to be practical, but I am." "Then nothing else matters. We will figure out the details, but I am not losing you, Sarah. Not to fear, not to practical considerations, not to anything." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, pouring everything she felt into it. When they broke apart, Mrs. Patterson was standing in the doorway with a handkerchief pressed to her eyes. "Oh, do not mind me," the older woman said. "I am just so happy for you both." The next few days passed in a blur. Judge Callahan arrived on schedule, a stern-faced man in his 60s with a reputation for fairness. He listened to Sarah's testimony, examined the evidence, and interviewed the witnesses. Vincent Harrow was formally charged with 2 counts of murder, conspiracy, theft, and a host of other crimes. The investigation expanded to include the county sheriff and several prominent businessmen. The trial took place in Red Creek's small courthouse, with people packed in to witness justice being served. Sarah sat in the front row, Jake beside her, as witness after witness told their stories. The pawnbroker identified Harrow as the man who had sold Marcus Webb's watch. The bartender described hearing Harrow and Marcus argue. Sarah's witnesses testified about what they had seen the night of Marcus's death and the day Thomas was killed. When it was Sarah's turn to testify, she spoke clearly and calmly, laying out everything she had discovered. She looked directly at Harrow as she spoke, refusing to be intimidated. Jake watched her with unconcealed pride. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Vincent Harrow would hang for his crimes and his co-conspirators would face their own reckonings. When it was over, Sarah stood outside the courthouse, breathing in the warm Texas air. It was finished. Thomas's name was cleared. Justice had been served. She should feel triumphant, but instead she just felt tired and sad. Her brother was still dead. Nothing could bring him back. Jake came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" "That I wish Thomas was here to see this, that he would be proud maybe, but also that none of this would have happened if he was still alive." "He would be proud," Jake said firmly. "You fought for him when no one else would. You risked everything to make sure the truth came out. That is the greatest gift you could give him." Sarah leaned back against Jake's solid warmth. "What now? Really, what comes next?" "Well, I have been thinking about that. There is a small town about 50 miles south of here, Pleasant Valley. It is growing, needs a sheriff. I have been offered the job." Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "A sheriff? But what about being a marshal?" "Being a marshal means moving constantly, never settling down. Being a sheriff means having a home, being part of a community. It means being able to have a life beyond just work." He brushed a strand of hair back from her face. "It means being able to have a family if that is something we both want." Sarah's heart was racing. "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" Jake smiled and reached into his pocket, pulling out a simple gold ring. "Sarah Mitchell, I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other for a couple of weeks, but I also know that I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I know that I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making you smile, keeping you safe, building something real and lasting with you. Will you marry me?" Sarah's vision blurred with tears, but she was laughing too. "Yes, yes, of course yes." Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, then lifted her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Sarah felt happiness flood through her like sunlight. "When?" she asked when they finally broke apart. "As soon as you want." "Tomorrow, if you would like. Judge Callahan is still in town." "Tomorrow," Sarah agreed. She looked at the ring on her finger, simple and perfect. "Where did you get this?" "It was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died, told me to give it to a woman worthy of it. I think she would have loved you." They were married the next afternoon in the small church at the edge of town. Mrs. Patterson stood as Sarah's witness, crying happy tears throughout the ceremony. Frank and Henry were there, grinning broadly as Jake said his vows. Judge Callahan performed the ceremony, his stern face softening as he pronounced them husband and wife. Sarah wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her make, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. Jake wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed, his dark hair neat for once. When he looked at her as she walked down the aisle, Sarah saw her entire future in his eyes. "I, Jake Thornton, take you, Sarah Mitchell, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice strong and sure. "I promise to love you, protect you, stand by your side through whatever comes. In joy and in sorrow, in plenty and in want, for all the days of my life. I, Sarah Mitchell, take you, Jake Thornton, to be my lawfully wedded husband," Sarah said, her voice wavering slightly with emotion. "I promise to love you, trust you, build a life with you. In sunshine and storm, in peace and trouble, for all the days of my life." When Judge Callahan told Jake he could kiss his bride, Jake did so tenderly, reverently, like Sarah was something precious and fragile. But when she kissed him back with equal passion, he laughed against her lips and deepened the kiss, making the small audience cheer. They had a simple celebration at the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson had prepared a feast, and half the town showed up to wish them well. Frank told embarrassing stories about Jake's early days as a lawman. Henry gave a toast in broken English that somehow managed to be both funny and touching. Sarah laughed more than she had in months, surrounded by new friends, married to a man she loved beyond reason. That night, they stayed in Sarah's room at the boarding house, now their room, at least for the night. Jake was gentle and patient, making sure Sarah felt safe and cherished. They came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other, building something new together. Afterwards, Sarah lay with her head on Jake's chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling utterly content. "I am scared," she said softly into the darkness. Jake's arms tightened around her. "Of what? Of what comes after, of this happiness? What if something happens? What if I lose you like I lost Thomas?" Jake was quiet for a moment, then he tilted her face up to look at him. "Sarah, I cannot promise that nothing bad will ever happen. Life is uncertain, especially out here. But I can promise that whatever comes, whatever challenges we will face them together. You are not alone anymore, you will never be alone again." "We will face it together," Sarah repeated, letting the words sink in. "Always," Jake promised and kissed her softly. They left for Pleasant Valley 3 days later. Sarah said her goodbyes to Mrs. Patterson, promising to write regularly and visit when they could. The older woman hugged her tightly, whispering that Sarah's mother would be so proud of her. The ride to Pleasant Valley took 2 days. Jake and Sarah rode side by side, talking about their plans, their hopes for the future. Frank and Henry accompanied them, planning to help Jake settle in before heading back to San Antonio. Pleasant Valley was true to its name, a growing town nestled in a green valley with a river running through it. It was larger than Red Creek, with a proper school, several churches, and a main street lined with thriving businesses. The sheriff's office was a small building near the center of town, with a tidy house behind it for the sheriff and his family. "This is ours," Sarah asked, looking at the house with its covered porch and flower boxes. "If you want it," Jake said. "The town provides it as part of the sheriff's compensation." Sarah walked through the house, taking in the sitting room, the kitchen with its large stove, the 2 bedrooms upstairs. It needed work, needed furniture and curtains and all the small touches that made a house a home. But it had good bones, and more importantly, it would be theirs. "I love it," she said, coming back out to where Jake waited anxiously on the porch. He grinned and swept her into his arms. "Then let us make it a home." They spent the next week settling in. Jake took on his duties as sheriff, getting to know the town and its people. Sarah set about making the house comfortable, sewing curtains, arranging the furniture they bought from the general store, planting flowers in the boxes on the porch. She also began teaching at the local school 3 days a week, finding purpose in continuing her brother's profession. Life fell into a peaceful rhythm. Jake would come home for lunch when he could, and they would sit on their porch eating sandwiches and talking about their days. In the evenings, they would cook dinner together, then sit by the fire reading or just enjoying each other's company. On Sundays, they went to church and then had dinner with whichever townspeople had invited them over. It was simple, domestic, and absolutely perfect. 6 months after they moved to Pleasant Valley, Sarah realized she was pregnant. She told Jake one evening over dinner, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. He was silent for a long moment, then he stood and came around the table, pulling her into his arms. "Really, are you sure?" "The doctor confirmed it today. We are going to have a baby, Jake." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and when he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Sarah said, wiping away his tears with her thumbs. The pregnancy was relatively easy. Sarah continued teaching until she was 6 months along, then reluctantly stopped as the work became too tiring. Jake was attentive almost to the point of being overbearing, constantly worried about her health and the baby's well-being. Sarah found it endearing, even when she had to tell him to stop fussing. Their son was born on a warm spring evening in 1877 after 12 hours of labor that left Sarah exhausted but elated. Jake was there through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, telling her how strong she was. When the doctor finally placed their baby in Jake's arms, Sarah watched her husband's face transform with wonder and love. "He is perfect," Jake breathed, carefully bringing the baby to Sarah. "Look what we made." They named him Thomas after Sarah's brother. Little Thomas had Jake's dark hair and what looked like it would be Sarah's blue eyes. He was healthy and loud and absolutely beautiful. "Hello, Thomas," Sarah whispered, touching his tiny hand. "Your uncle would have loved you so much." Jake kissed her forehead. "And we will make sure he knows about him, about how brave his uncle was, how much he was loved." Parenthood was harder than either of them expected. Thomas was a colicky baby who did not sleep well for the first few months. Sarah and Jake took turns walking him at night, both exhausted but determined to support each other. On particularly hard nights, when Thomas would not stop crying and Sarah was at the end of her rope, Jake would take the baby and send Sarah to bed, dealing with it himself so she could rest. "We are in this together," he would remind her. "You do not have to do it alone." And Sarah never did feel alone. Even on the hardest days, when Thomas was fussy and the house was a mess, and she felt like she was failing at everything, Jake would come home and wrap his arms around her and tell her she was doing an amazing job. Thomas started to settle as he grew older, sleeping longer stretches, smiling more. Sarah fell completely in love with motherhood, with the weight of her son in her arms, the sweet baby smell of him, the way he looked at her like she was his whole world. Jake was a natural father, patient and gentle but also playful. Sarah would often find them on the floor together, Jake making silly faces to make Thomas giggle, or carefully teaching him to stack blocks even though he was far too young to understand. "You are wonderful with him," Sarah said one evening, watching Jake give Thomas a bath. "He is easy to be wonderful with," Jake replied, carefully washing the baby's hair. "He is the best thing we ever made." "We make good things together," Sarah agreed, coming to stand beside them. Jake looked up at her with so much love in his eyes that it took her breath away. "We really do." The years passed peacefully. Thomas grew into a bright, curious toddler, then a rambunctious little boy. Sarah returned to teaching part-time, finding balance between her career and her family. Jake remained sheriff, well-respected and well-liked in Pleasant Valley. When Thomas was 3, Sarah became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy felt easier even though she was more tired chasing after a toddler while carrying another baby. Their daughter was born in the winter of 1880, a smaller baby than Thomas had been but just as healthy. They named her Emma Grace, after Jake's sister, and as a reminder of the grace that had brought them together. Emma was a calmer baby than Thomas had been, sleeping well and smiling early. Thomas was fascinated by his little sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help take care of her. Jake would sit with Thomas and Emma together, one child on each knee, reading them stories in his deep, soothing voice. "Our family," Sarah would think, watching them together, feeling her heart swell with love. This was what she had been scared of that day in Red Creek, this overwhelming happiness, this beautiful life they were building together. She had been afraid of losing it, of something going wrong. But Jake had been right. Whatever challenges came, they faced them together, and that made all the difference. There were hard times, of course. A drought one summer that left everyone in Pleasant Valley struggling. A robbery at the bank that resulted in Jake being shot in the arm, a minor injury that nonetheless left Sarah terrified for days. An illness that swept through the town and left both children sick for a week, though they recovered fully. But through it all, Sarah and Jake held to each other, facing each challenge as a team. They argued sometimes, like all couples did, but they always worked through it, always came back to the love that anchored them. When Thomas was 8 and Emma was 5, Sarah suggested they visit Red Creek. She wanted to see Mrs. Patterson, wanted the children to see where she and Jake had met, wanted to visit her brother's grave. They made the journey in late spring when the weather was mild. Mrs. Patterson was older now but still spry, and she wept happy tears when she saw Sarah and Jake and their children. She insisted they stay with her, and for 3 days they enjoyed her hospitality and reminisced about that eventful summer of 1876. Sarah took Jake and the children to the cemetery where Thomas was buried. She had not been back since the trial, and seeing the headstone brought a fresh wave of grief even after all these years. "This is your Uncle Thomas," she told her children. "He was a good man who loved learning and teaching, and he would have loved you both so much." Young Thomas, old enough to understand death, put his hand on his mother's. "Is he the one I was named after?" "Yes, your father and I wanted to honor his memory by giving you his name." "I will try to be like him," Thomas said seriously. "I will try to be good and kind." Sarah pulled her son into a hug, tears streaming down her face. "You already are, sweetheart, you already are." Jake knelt and placed flowers on the grave, his arm around Emma. "Thank you," he said softly to the headstone. "Thank you for having a sister who was brave enough to fight for you. If not for you, I would never have met her. I would never have this life." They stood there for a while, a family united by love and loss, past and present intertwined. That evening, sitting on Mrs. Patterson's porch much like Sarah and Jake had done 9 years before, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed. "Do you remember that night," she asked Jake, "when I told you I was scared of what comes after?" "I remember," Jake said, taking her hand. "I remember everything about those days. I was so afraid of being happy, afraid of losing you, afraid of building a life that could be taken away. And now—" Sarah looked at their children playing in the yard, at the wedding ring on her finger, at the man beside her who had kept every promise he ever made. "Now I know that life is uncertain no matter what. Bad things can happen. But the love we build, the family we create, the moments we share, they are worth the risk. They are worth everything." Jake lifted her hand and kissed it. "We have faced it all together. And we always will," Sarah said. They sat there as the sun set, hands clasped, surrounded by love, grateful for every moment that had brought them to this place. The fear that had once consumed Sarah had transformed into faith, faith in their love, in their partnership, in the future they were building together. Years continued to pass. Thomas grew into a young man who shared his namesake's love of learning, eventually becoming a teacher himself. Emma showed her father's sense of justice and became a lawyer, one of the first women to practice law in Texas. Both children married and gave Sarah and Jake grandchildren to spoil. Jake eventually retired from being sheriff, and he and Sarah spent their later years traveling, visiting their children and grandchildren, tending to their garden, and enjoying the peaceful life they had built together. On their 30th wedding anniversary, they returned to Red Creek one final time. Mrs. Patterson had passed away years before, but the boarding house was still there, now run by one of her nieces. The town had grown and changed, but the small church where they married still stood. They walked to the church hand in hand, both graying now but still strong. Inside, the church was empty and quiet. They sat in the same pew where they had exchanged vows 3 decades before. "Do you have any regrets?" Sarah asked, leaning against Jake's shoulder. "Not a single one," Jake said firmly. "None, except maybe that I did not meet you sooner." "We met exactly when we were supposed to," Jake said. "Everything happened exactly as it needed to." Sarah thought about the girl she had been, scared and grieving, fighting alone for justice. She thought about the man who had appeared in her moment of greatest need, who had chosen to stand with her, to love her, to build a life with her. She thought about everything they had overcome together, every challenge they had faced, every joy they had shared. "I love you," she said, the same words she had said 1,000 times, but that never got old. "I love you too," Jake replied, kissing her softly. "Always have, always will." They sat there in the quiet church, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love over fear, who had built something beautiful and lasting from the ashes of tragedy. Outside, the Texas sun shone bright and warm. The Wild West they had known was fading, giving way to a new century, new challenges, new possibilities. But Sarah and Jake faced it all together, just as they always had, just as they always would. Their love story had begun with fear and danger, with gunshots in a canyon and documents scattered in the dust. It had grown through trials and hardships, through sleepless nights with colicky babies and worries about making ends meet. It had matured into something deep and abiding, a partnership built on trust and respect, and an unshakable commitment to facing whatever came together. When Sarah Mitchell had ridden into Red Creek in the summer of 1876, she had been running toward justice, but also running from pain, from loss, from a future that seemed impossibly empty. When Jake Thornton had appeared in that canyon, he had been drifting, still haunted by his sister's death, searching for purpose beyond vengeance. Together they had found what they were both looking for. Justice, yes, but also love. Purpose, but also peace. A future, but also a present worth living fully. They had been scared of what comes after, but they had faced it together, and that had made all the difference. Years later, when they were both quite old, sitting on the porch of their home in Pleasant Valley, watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard, Sarah would think back to that terrified girl in the canyon and smile. "What are you thinking about?" Jake would ask, still able to read her after 50 years together. "About how far we have come," Sarah would reply. "About how scared I was and how brave you helped me be." "You were always brave," Jake would insist. "I just reminded you of it." And Sarah would take his wrinkled hand in hers, marveling that even after all these years, his touch could still make her heart flutter. "We did good, did we not? We built something real." "We built something beautiful," Jake would agree. "And it all started because you were brave enough to fight for what was right, and I was lucky enough to find you." Their story would become a legend in their family, passed down through generations. The tale of Sarah Mitchell, who took on corrupt lawmen to clear her brother's name, and Jake Thornton, the marshal who helped her and fell in love with her in the process. Their great-grandchildren would grow up hearing about how they met, how they married after knowing each other for only 2 weeks, how they built a life together in the Wild West. But the most important part of the story, the part that Sarah and Jake always emphasized when they told it, was not the danger or the drama or even the quick romance. It was the commitment they made to each other, the promise to face whatever came together. Because in the end, that was what love meant. Not grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but showing up, day after day, choosing each other, facing the future hand in hand. Sarah had been scared of what comes after. But what came after was a lifetime of love, a family that spanned generations, memories that could fill books, and a partnership that never wavered. What came after was everything she had been afraid to hope for, and more than she had ever dreamed possible. And through it all, Jake had been true to his word. They had faced it together, and they always would, for all the days of their lives. The sun set over Pleasant Valley one final time for Sarah and Jake, decades after their story began. They passed away within days of each other, neither able to bear being without the other for long. They were buried side by side in the cemetery, their headstone reading simply, "Together in life, together in death, together forever." Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to mourn them, but also to celebrate them, to remember their love story, to carry forward their legacy of courage and commitment and choosing love over fear. And in the town of Pleasant Valley in the state of Texas, the story of Sarah and Jake would be told for generations to come. Not as a tale of the Wild West's violence and danger, though that was part of it, but as a love story, pure and simple. A story about two people who found each other when they needed it most, who built something beautiful together, who proved that love could flourish even in the harshest circumstances. A story about being scared of what comes after, but finding the courage to face it together. And that, in the end, was the most important story of all.